So this is a review for Duck Amuck, and with me today are my good friends Eli Copperman and Manny Cruz. Say hi, guys.
You're just flopping over with talent, aren't you, Doc?
Old MacDonald had a farm. E-I-E-I-O.
Just a few bits of info to get out of the way. So this is for Duck Amuck, released on the 28th of February 1953. It's the 673rd in the series, and it's directed by, who else? Chuck Jones. So this cartoon is very obscure. No one's ever really seen it in years. In fact, Buddy's Bearcats is a lot more popular than our kid, of course. This cartoon you can see on the Looney Tunes Gone Collection Volume 1 DVD set, the Platinum Collection Volume 1 Blu-ray set. It's seen just about everywhere. Any compilation you can think of, we usually put this one in there. It's that common. But in case you are one of the few that haven't seen this one, and believe me, even if you haven't seen it, you will certainly know of it and its themes. But we initially see Daffy Duck as a musketeer, but then an unseen animator / tormentor decides to mess things up for Daffy by constantly changing things up, much to Daffy's frustration. And don't bother asking me to put the cartoon on YouTube in full without me talking, because it ain't gonna happen. It'll just get blocked. It's a copyrighted cartoon, so you'll have to find another avenue to look for it. So, a few bits of trivia for this very obscure cartoon. Oh, kid, I won't say any more of that joke, but the title card itself, it looks actually very similar to Rabbit Hood. I don't know if that's by choice, just to lull people into false sense of security that they're going to get this straightforward cartoon in the beginning.
You could consider the title to be a red herring in a sense, because you think, okay, this cartoon's going to be about one thing, and then it completely plays with your expectations, and you never know where it's going.
Exactly, and Manny's going to go through the music cue, which sounds very familiar as well. I'm pretty sure to a lot of people if they heard it. So this was voted number 2 in the top 50 greatest cartoons of all time back in 1994. And in case you're wondering what was the first, it's What's Opera, Doc, which there shouldn't really be any surprise there. Although I am curious, if they were to do another list, considering how many cartoons and shorts and feature lengths and whatever have come since then, how different would it be?
Yeah. That book is like 30 years old at this point, and I've often wondered what other cartoons would have been added if they did like a revised version of that book or a follow-up of some sorts. But for what it is, I am not shocked that it's super high, but at the same time, Chuck Jones was still alive, and his reputation was super high that, like, most of the Looney Tunes' popularity was built off of his success.
The 15 cartoons that I personally enjoy the most, this would not come up on my list. Not because it's not a good cartoon. This is an absolutely incredible cartoon, and it deserves all the praise it gets. But I guess this cartoon, since it's so well known culturally speaking, that for me personally, it kind of lost a little bit of its appeal because it's been parodied so much. And this is one of the go-to cartoons that people think of when they think of Warner Brothers cartoons. But ironically, my favorite Warner Brothers short is number 1 on the list, What's Opera Doc, but it appeals more for me as a musician. But when it comes to the humor and just how groundbreaking this cartoon is, I mean, it definitely deserves the praise it gets. And I guess one thing, I wish that I was alive in 1953 to see this cartoon brand new and just see how groundbreaking and how it really just tears down the fourth wall, and just how, I guess this term wasn't used back then, but now how meta the cartoon is. And we kind of take it for granted because everything, especially I would say in the past 20, 30 years, a lot of things in pop culture are so meta now. But this is like one of the early examples of that. You don't realize how groundbreaking it was when it was there originally.
I showed it to my kids for the first time a few years ago, and
cool.
Seeing their reaction to this and a few of the bits that come up, which we'll certainly get into as we discuss the cartoon proper, because I know this cartoon back to front. When I'm watching it today, it's not like I discovered anything new, but I just watch it because, heck, it's such a great cartoon anyway. But I knew it off by heart, so I was sitting there just watching their reactions to it, and sure enough, they were just shocked and like, wait a minute, can you actually do this in the cartoon? It was that kind of a face that they were making, which was just all nice to see. I mean, this cartoon, it's been deemed in 1999 to be culturally significant, as it should, and it was selected for preservation in the National Film Registry in the United States Library of Congress, and only a few shorts have had that honor, and it's a shame because more shorts should be on there. I think it's like 3 of them, and I think they're all by Chuck Jones, so it would be good if there could be put in a few others, like Tex Avery should belong in there for sure, but that's another discussion entirely. And in terms of impact on pop culture, yeah, it's been homaged and parodied countless times, not just in Looney Tunes, and including its sequel, Rabbit Rampage, which we'll discuss when we get to it, of course. All sorts of animated properties have done some sort of variation of this theme, with the main character versus an unseen force that's controlling their lives and destiny or whatever. And this even has 2 video games based on this very idea. One, of course, being the Super Nintendo game Bugs Bunny's Rabbit Rampage, and another one on the Nintendo DS called Looney Tunes Duck Amuck. But what's even more interesting is Manny's favorite fruit or vegetable, whatever you want to call it.
Thanks for the sour persimmons, cousin.
I wanted to know what sour persimmons were, because Daffy Duck mentions that in the short. I had no idea what persimmons is. I honestly didn't know. So sure enough, I had a look, and it's this weird mix between a tomato and a berry, and when unripe, they are very, very sour. So I guess that's that reference. So, but Manny, is that your favorite fruit or vegetable? Have you tried it before?
I have had a persimmon in my life before, and it's too sweet to be sour. I'm gonna get funky like a monkey.
I don't know why I started quoting Macho Man Randy Savage, but you said sweet and sour. I just had to
dig into the madness. Yeah, dig it.
No, I've actually never, because I'm pretty sure I've had. Is it? Oh, that's pomegranate. Never mind.
I've had pomegranate. Oh. I've never had a persimmon, though.
When I finish editing this whole review, I guess I'll have one to try. Maybe I'll do that.
There you go.
just go on Amazon or order one.
Make sure it's sweet and sour.
Oh, yeah, so I'll order one, right? I'll make sure it's not sour or anything like that, for sure. But that's what it is, because I really didn't have an idea of what it was, and I'm sure a lot of people watching the short probably wouldn't know either, so there you are. I listened to the audio commentary for this by Kookaburra, which people should listen to, and I'm glad in that one he actually put a lot of Chuck Jones recordings in there, so technically it was like Chuck Jones doing the audio commentary, which I thought was great.
Yeah.
And one fascinating thing about this is that he confirms that Bugs Bunny almost wasn't used for a gag in the end, as there was kind of resistance to do so because Bugs Bunny was the biggest star. And as they were developing this short, they didn't really have an answer to what was going to happen at the end. It's just sort of got developed. And then when they thought, oh, let's put Bugs Bunny in it, it was kind of like the obvious answer, but there was definitely resistance. People need to also understand, while the Bugs Bunny Daffy Duck team up seems normal now, that it's like very common, but back then, the only 2 entries, unless you count one cameo one by Frank Tashlin, but the only 2 significant entries were by Chuck Jones, were the first 2 Hunter Trilogy entries that they were teamed up in and nothing else. So you can sort of understand why there would have been resistance at the time. Now it seems like a no-brainer.
Oh, yeah. And nowadays, people who aren't even all that familiar with Looney Tunes, if you ask them what they think of like Bugs Bunny and Daffy Duck, they'll immediately think of their chemistry with each other, that Bugs is the typical wise guy hero and Daffy is kind of the miserable loser that we've seen in a lot of cartoons. But yeah, like at that time, you're right, Anthony. Nobody really would have thought that Bugs Bunny would have been there.
Exactly. Taking a look at this short itself, and I just want to say overall, I mean, the great thing about this short to me, I've got 2 points to make on this. Rewatching it now after watching all the other Looney Tunes in order. But the great thing about this short is how it focuses on just character. And if you have a character that's strongly defined, you can have one character sustain a whole short despite changing up settings, appearances, and everything, and you still know it's Daffy Duck. You still know his personality, and it can carry an entire short. The other thing I want to mention as well is that at the time, no one would have seen anything like this. Now, you had at the time UPA, they challenged the conventions of what a cartoon could look like with its stylized look. And one could also argue Tex Avery, since the 30s, he challenged conventions of animation right up until his last 4 Walter Lantz shorts in the 50s, and he was challenging what a gag could be and pushing how far gags could go. Whereas here, it's basically, character study, and no one would have seen anything like this at the time. It really was just wow. And as you said, Manny, and I totally agree with you, I would love to be able to go back in time and see people's reactions to this when it first came out.
I often say that if I had a time machine, I would go back to see Who Framed Roger Rabbit when it came out. But if I could go back in time to watch any Looney Tunes cartoon, it would probably be a Friz Freleng or Bob Clampett cartoon. But I would hands down go back in time to see this on the big screen for the very first time. Or heck, if it's playing at a local theater nearby, I would stop what I'm doing right now and go watch it immediately.
I guess I didn't say it before, but kind of in this vein that a lot of the stuff that I enjoy, I was not alive to experience it in its heyday, and especially with the music that I listened to, just a lot of the music from the 60s, 70s, 80s. I mean, I was, Eli, going with your point, I wish I could have seen Who Framed Roger Rabbit. I could have when it premiered, but I was an infant. I was a newborn. I couldn't do much back then, but obviously I saw it years later when I was a little older on VHS. But if only we could do a time machine and just go back and watch any cartoon in general on the screen, because I once went to a screening in 2002 at the Museum of Modern Art in New York in the city, and that was actually the first and only time I ran into our wonderful guru of animation history, Jerry Beck. And I also got to meet a friend of mine, Nelson Hughes. Hi, Nelson, if you're listening to this. And it was a screening of CinemaScope cartoons. The only one I remember watching was Blue Cat Blues, because it's just how grim that cartoon is. But it's just that experience of enjoying the cartoons as they were originally meant to be shown. I mean, my favorite film is Ghostbusters, and I got to experience it a few times in a movie theater when they re-released the film. And just seeing how people react to it was just a great experience. And I got to see the first Ninja Turtles film from 1990 in a movie theater. And same thing, just getting that live reaction, because I wasn't alive in 1984. And I was 2 in 1990, so I couldn't really enjoy it then.
I've seen re-releases of older films on special screenings. Like, I remember seeing Evil Dead 2 at my local theater, and the audience reactions were so much fun. But as far as like the Looney Tunes cartoons, a couple of years ago in Manhattan, but I went to a theater that was screening Heavy Traffic, the Ralph Bakshi film, and I will say the movie itself was fantastic to watch, especially with the audience reaction. But before they played that film, they actually played Rabbit of Seville, and the sound quality and the presentation, it felt like you were seeing a retro cartoon from the point of view of a modern day theater, and it was just so much fun to watch. You really feel like you're watching these cartoons the way they were meant to be seen, like you really feel the impact.
Oh yeah, absolutely. That's only happened to me once. I saw Alibaba Bunny in the theater before, of all films, RoboCop, would you believe? So that was no joke. They actually show that. I'm not kidding. I didn't expect it, and the audience was just cracking up, laughing at all the jokes in there. I know it's not politically correct today, really, but it's still solidly made short, and it's got a lot of funny bits. But speaking of funny bits, let's look at this short, and this is going to be one of those reviews where, as we said before we recorded, what on earth are we going to talk about? Because this cartoon's been covered to death, but it's more, we can put our point of views out there. And I'll start off by saying, I love how it opens, gets you in that false sense of security, and then all of a sudden the background runs out. As Jones himself mentions, he goes, what would happen if the background ran out? So that's the genesis of the idea of this short.
My guard, my blade. Hey, psst, whoever's in charge here. The scenery. Where's the scenery?
And I just love all the changes he does in the beginning. He goes from the musketeer to a farmer.
Duck, he had a farm, E-I-A-I-O. And on this farm he had an igloo, E-I-E-I-O.
To a skier.
Dashing through the snow, through the fields we go, laughing all the way.
And then to an Islander, where Daffy, of course, looks great in the skirt. We absolutely love that, of course. Yeah, it's fantastic.
Farewell to thee, the wind will carry back our sad refrain. One last embrace before we say,
But I think the moment that my kids really reacted seeing this for the first time was the eraser. It's like, wait a minute, what's this eraser? It's just like rubbing out Daffy here.
Buster, it may come as a complete surprise to you to find that this is an animated cartoon. And that in animated cartoons they have scenery. And in all the years
the scene that gets to me all the time as far as sound design goes, like, funny that you mentioned that, is the scene right afterwards where they play with the sound effects.
Yes, and you can even hear a record player too. If you just faintly, you can hear that the needle drop.
Yeah.
I love that little effect. That it's not even Foley or anything, it's just some pre-recorded stuff on a record. It's like Daffy's not even good enough for actual Foley, it's got to be the pre-done stuff.
That explains why all those sound effects sound so weird. It's funny, like you mentioned that this whole short's about character. Like the scene following that where he's just about to scream, but he like says, first there's a monkey effect. Like the facial reactions he gives are just priceless. If anybody wants to understand how acting and animation works, like really just watch any solid Chuck Jones cartoon, and the expressions and acting will convey so much more than any dialogue. But the extra touch that I feel like most people don't talk about, so Daffy is just about to say something. He screams like a rooster. He stops. He's about to say something again, but then he sounds a little like a monkey, and he closes his mouth, and he just barely opens it up, and you just hear this very faint chirp sound effect or whatever. I don't know why, but that cracks me up more than the other two sound effects.
Yeah. What cracks me up, Eli, is how you confuse the monkey with a kookaburra. That's a kookaburra bird, the second one. That's an Aussie bird that laughs like that.
Really?
That's a kookaburra, yeah.
Oh my god. My whole childhood completely flipped upside down.
It's a kookaburra. Shame on you. Go back and learn more about Australia. Get out of here.
I knew those birds growing up because I was an animal weirdo, but...
Well,
yeah,
Manny, did you think it was a kookaburra or a monkey?
Kookaburra sits in the old gum tree. Merry, merry king of the bush is he. Laugh, Kookaburra, laugh. Kookaburra, gay your life must be. I actually, as a kid, I made the mistake that it was a monkey, but thanks to learning that song as in my experiences as a music educator and then finding out what the sound of a kookaburra was, I was like, yay, I know that. Because you think, and we all know this from watching cartoons, every time there's a jungle scene, you're I can't do a kookaburra, but we always assume that was a monkey. But no, it's just some crazy Aussie bird laughing his head off.
So, Eli, whenever you come to Australia, I'll make sure I introduce you to some kookaburras because...
Oh, please do. I'd love to meet some kookaburra families.
Yep, but you just can't ride in kangaroos' pouches, okay?
All right.
The last time I tried that, they kicked me out of the zoo, so yeah. But yeah, the sound effects is great. Then...
And I've never been so humiliated in all my life!
But you were saying, Eli, that the bit that makes you laugh is that little minor noise, which cracks me up too. But what cracks me up now, I think some of the things between watching it as a kid and watching it as adults, I laugh more at other things now. And for me, it's that really poorly drawn background. Because, oh, ho, that's rich, that's dandy. And then Mel Blanc's delivery of, now how about some colour, stupid?
Now how about some color, stupid? Hey!
For some reason, I can just picture that Manny at school, some kid in his class. Yeah, now put some color there, stupid. No, a kid.
And then I'm fired.
How about some effort, stupid?
So then we see that wonderful design of Daffy that gets actually reused once in a Patty Freeling cartoon, which was like a choice.
We don't speak of that cartoon. It gives everybody nightmares.
Well, at some point I'll have to live that nightmare, so pray for Mojo. The design just cracks me up. I wonder how they came up with it. I know obviously the tail says screwball on it in its own way, but it's just that design is just so anarchic, so beautiful. I absolutely love that. But the bit that I laughed more as a kid, and I think my kids gave us the biggest laugh, is that zooming gag. This is a close-up. A close-up, you jerk, a close-up, and it goes right up to the eyes. I remember my kids used to always tell me, rewind it all the time, because they just like to see that bit, because they're laughing so much. Oh, it's so good. Man. Like I said, even though I've seen this cartoon hundreds of times, like I'm sure you boys have seen it 100 times, it still just cracks us up in various ways. It's fantastic. And we then get to a point where the background, which technically you can count the background as a character in this one, because it goes from just being a source of frustration for Daffy with the changing scenery, but now it's gone to literally physically causing issues for Daffy, with Daffy battling the background. I thought that was a nice little touch there.
Oh yeah, it's especially during the over the sea, let's go men bit. like falls right into the ocean.
What do you think, Manny? Like, would you count the background as a second character?
That's tough to say, because it could be that the background is a character of its own machinations and ideals and thoughts and character progression, or it could just be mainly the animator who, I guess we already mentioned, it's this Bugs Bunny just screwing around with Daffy. That could be all his doing, that he already planned for the background to screw around with Daffy. Wow, I'm putting way too much thought into the background of this cartoon, but you did steal something I was thinking of that I just loved. The way that I would draw a background, with the terribly drawn one. Oh, that's dandy. One thing that I noticed when it was a scene where Daffy was playing ukulele, and I was looking at the background, and I noticed that the background that was there, that Noble designed and the guard painted, was definitely more of that UPA vein, where it's just very abstract. And I never noticed that before when I watched the cartoon. I'm thinking, oh yeah, he's in the Hawaiian scene or whatever, but then I looked at the background and said, oh yeah, it's definitely the UPA influences shining through in that background.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think that would really surprise most of us, considering that Chuck Jones helped them with their, not pilot film, but like one of their earliest works, Hellbent for Election. So I'm sure Maurice Noble definitely got a little bit of that influence when you're working with Chuck.
There's the wonderful Dover Boys that Chuck was involved as well, and you can see it all coming together now anyway. Now Maurice Noble's on the scene, we'll be seeing more and more things stylized. Yeah. But how about like end title gag? Like, you know, let's get this picture started. Dun, 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 and just that frustration of Daffy.
That gag always blew my mind as a kid.
You got the end title card, or the end card rather, coming in, and Daffy's like, no, and pushes the thing away. And then Daffy's like, okay, now I'm going to entertain you in my imitable, I like how it says imitable fashion, the way that Mel Blanc delivers that line. It gives me a chuckle.
Ladies and gentlemen, there will be no further delays, so I shall attempt to entertain you in my own inimitable fashion.
But then we see the film break and go out of focus, and I guess for a lot of the really younger people, they might look at that and not realize what is happening, because pretty much everything's digital now, save for a few top-notch filmmakers that refuse to work on digital, like Christopher Nolan and all that. So they might look at this and go, what's going on? And back in the day, if you don't have a projectionist who's actually competent, yeah, you would have all sorts of film issues and films being skipped over or splices and all sorts of things happening. And that's also why the 3D fat didn't quite take off as well. One of the issues was if you don't have a proper projectionist to get both the left and the right projection exactly right, it can completely screw up the effect. So that's what we're seeing here. And as we mentioned before, the OG Daffy, as I call him, gets rubbed out. So, you know, I guess looking back, is that kind of like the meta moment where the last vestiges of the wacky Daffy gets wiped out of existence, and now it's just that prick Daffy continuing on from here on?
It's possible. Yeah.
Now that's meta for you. That's meta.
Wow, I didn't even think of that.
Could be, yeah, it is. A big brain moment here. No, it's just someone that clearly has no life thinking about that. Then we got the parachute gag, and I love the timing of the parachute being changed into an anvil, but even just before that. So Daffy's sitting there in midair, but he still has to lift the top up and jump on top to jump out, even though you just drop through. One thing I've noticed, though, I think this is the moment where Maurice Noble's going to come more into the picture. Like that one background with the anvil, where he's hitting the anvil, how stylized it is. We're going to see a lot more of that coming up with Duck Dodgers and various other shorts.
Under a spreading chestnut tree, the village smithy stands. The smith, my little man, is famous, strong and strong. And...
But, Manny, what exactly does Daffy say here? Because the people may not know.
So when I was doing the rewatch of this cartoon, I forgot how much that scene of Daffy hitting the anvil and then it turns into a bullet and it explodes cracks me up. And I had to listen to it a bunch of times. And kudos once again to the legendary Mel Blanc. He was killing it in this cartoon. I wrote down some of the lines that really made me laugh. Where's the scenery? The E-I-E-I-O line read, "Not me, you slop artist. A close-up, you jerk." And as you mentioned before, when the fake ending, he screams, "No, no." Oh, Mel Blanc. Rest in peace, legend. But when Daffy's just so flustered and he starts mumbling, and I'm like, what is he saying? But it just made me laugh every time. So I was listening a few times, and then I started realizing, oh, I think he's reciting I called it the Village Smithy, but it's actually the poem The Village Blacksmith by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. And then I found the poem, and then I listened again, and this is what Daffy is saying while he's suffering a concussion trying to speak. So he says the first part of the poem, which is, under a spreading chestnut tree, the village smithy stands. The smith, a mighty man is he, with large and sinewy hands. And that's probably the word that cracks me up the most. He's like, was the sinewy explosion hands? That's the part that gets me every time. And how did I learn about this poem? Well, you got to thank Chuck's old boss and colleague, Tex Avery, for the 1936 cartoon, The Village Smithy, with Porky Pig in it. And that's where I learned this poem from. And that's the thing. Like, when I realized Daffy was like, spreading chestnut tree, I'm like, oh, that's the poem from The Village Smithy. So look at that. Cartoons can be educational.
And also the fact that is hitting an anvil, and that's what a smithy would actually have, an actual anvil as part of their workplace. Also appropriate. So there you are.
That's not entirely surprising, considering that Chuck Jones, as Manny mentioned, was one of the very first people who worked for Tex Avery, and I'm pretty sure he was still an animator in Tex's unit when they made that cartoon. Although it also just could have been a contribution from Mike Maltese.
And we end up seeing the punchline, which is who is responsible for this, and we all know it's Bugs Bunny at the end. I do have to wonder, because that animation desk is a photo, so I wonder whose desk that was. Has anyone revealed it? I tried looking it up, and I don't know if anyone's actually identified that desk. Was it Ben Washam's? Was it, I don't know, someone's...
Who knows? It's funny you mentioned the animators like Ben Washam and stuff, but one point I actually did want to mention, when it comes to the animators in Chuck Jones's unit, at least during that period of time, a lot of the animators of Chuck Jones's units are probably a little harder to identify than other directors, mainly because Chuck Jones's style of directing was to stick very close to his admittedly very tight layouts. Some animator who worked for Chuck, I don't remember who it was, but they said that Chuck's layout drawings were so tight that the animation they did was basically just in-betweening. It's almost like Chuck Jones himself is the artist and Daffy's the puppet, even though, yeah, it's Bugs Bunny. But at the same time, the animators really knew how to elevate Chuck's layouts to very strong animation and in-betweens.
I definitely agree with that. Like, yeah, Chuck was a very tightly controlled director compared to someone like, say, Clampett. But Manny, I know you've been waiting for this. You've been waiting for Manny's music time, because there's a few music cues in this one, some of which we hear quite often, actually. So what do we hear in this cartoon?
It's time for Manny's music time with music trivia for you today. Did a little faster this time. All right, because this is not a merry melody from the 30s. All right. Is this a merry melody? Yeah, it is a merry melody, but it's from the 50s.
Yeah.
Yes, anyway, I digress. Actually, so it's crazy. I was saying before, like, we didn't grow up with these cartoons, whatever, but my dad was alive when this cartoon came out, but he was a newborn. Anyway, let's hop into Manny's music time. So here are the cues for this cartoon. So we got a few of them, and they pretty much fit nicely with the different costumes and the different gimmicks that Daffy has in this cartoon. So obviously, the cartoon starts off with the Merry Melodies theme, so Merrily Roll Along. And the cartoon during the opening titles is some original music from Carl Stalling. Sounds very majestic, and the opening is reminiscent of Rabbit Hood with the similar title cards and music as well. And the first original cue, quote-unquote, you hear is, Old MacDonald had a farm. E-I-E-I. Oh, love that. Love that performance from Mel Blanc. And that's obviously when Daffy's in his farmer gimmick. Very soon after, when he realizes, oh, there's snow and ice everywhere, and how appropriate. As I look outside, we just had a snowstorm here in New Jersey a few days ago. I hate the winter. But he gets on his skis, and he starts singing Jingle Bells from James Pierpont. And then later on, he goes to Hawaii. One of my close friends, he actually just went to Hawaii for his birthday, so lucky bum. And he starts singing the very famous Aloha Hoi with most of the lyrics, because it's nice to actually hear the song sung with the lyrics as opposed to just hearing it as a background cue in most Warner Brothers cartoons. while he's playing the ukulele or the ukulele. And a little bit of Raymond Scott made its way into this cartoon in the scene where Daffy becomes the very famous, I don't know what you call it, the sunflower platypus abomination
The
screwball thing.
hodgepodge.
The hodgepodge. Let's go with that. When he becomes the Daffy hodgepodge, which is one of those things that has made its way into popular culture and it always cracks me up. You hear The Penguin by Raymond Scott playing in the background. One of the more popular songs that Scott wrote.
Where's the rest of me? It isn't as though I haven't lived up to my contract, goodness knows. And goodness knows it isn't as though I haven't kept myself trim, goodness knows. I've done that.
Daffy enters the United States Navy, and you hear a little bit of the Song of the Marines by Harry Warren and Al Dubin. Those two are like as I said in the Manny's Music Times, I say Harry Warren and Al Dubin are the Paul McCartney and John Lennon of Warner Brothers cues because they're constantly popping up. And it's a great song, you know, Over the Sea, Let's Go, Men. One of my personal favorite cues in WB Shorts.
Rembrandt, if you'll kindly oblige with a little appropriate scenery, over the sea, let's go, men. We're shoving right off, again.
The next one that came up, I had to do a listen of it because I was trying to find exactly where it was in the cartoon because the other ones were pretty easy to recognize. So this song is called Can't We Talk It Over by Ned Washington and Victor Young. And that occurs after Daffy's fighting with the background, and he's pretty much pleading with Bugs. He's like, you know what? You go your way, and I go my way. And that song was written sometime in the 30s. I was listening to several recordings of it before this. And this is something that I always tell people who are not Looney Tunes nerds like we are, but just the appreciation that I have of these cartoons as the years go by and just how well Carl Stalling and Milt Franklin just pick the cues, and it's just another layer of joke added on top of it. And once I found out the name of the cue, and then I realized that Daffy is pleading with Bugs and just pretty much like, you know, hey, meet me halfway. And the song title just reinforces the joke. Just gives you another appreciation to just these cartoons.
And I'll go mine. Live and let live. Right? Right. Ladies and gentlemen, there will be no further delays, so I shall attempt to entertain you in my own inimitable fashion.
You hear a little bit of Stephen Foster later on. Old Folks at Home, that's when he starts doing his tap dancing routine when the film starts messing up, the projector starts messing up. Old Folks at Home or Way Down Beneath the Swanee River, a minstrel song from Stephen Foster.
Now what?
You hear Captain of the Clouds by Harold Arlen and Johnny Mercer. Harold Arlen, most famous for writing Over the Rainbow from The Wizard of Oz and other songs from that film. His birthday was actually a few days ago, and I forgot the day, but it's in February. And that's da 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 when Daffy's in the airplane, he crashes into the mountain.
I'm a buzzboy.
And this one I was having a little trouble figuring out. So I mentioned it in a previous MMT, Manny Music Time, that for many years I would hear a particular cue in cartoons, ba bum 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 ba, like a big orchestral swell. And I would hear it in Warner Brothers Shorts. I think I heard it in an episode of Tasmania or Tiny Toons, one of those shows. And I found out years later that it's the overture to an opera by Richard Wagner called Rienzi. I know that it's featured, that particular part, bum, 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 bum. It was featured in Russian Rhapsody. It was featured, I believe, in Hair Meets Hair and other Warner Brothers Shorts. But that's not the part that you hear in this cartoon. You only hear it for about 8 seconds, but it's another part of the overture that's near the end. And that's when Daffy is shouting at Bugs at the ending after the bullet explodes. And I was like, is it that? Because it's not a part of the overture that really pops out to you. It's just more subtle. But like when I was doing a deep listen to it, I was like, yeah, that sounds like how Wagner writes. So I'm going to go with that.
All right. Enough is enough. This is the final, the very, very last straw. Who is responsible for this? I demand that you show yourself. Who are you? Huh?
And obviously just the amazing original music that Carl Stalling wrote. I've said it before and I'll say it again. It's not only the arrangement that Carl Stalling did, because obviously he's the one that says, all right, Daffy's a farmer, Old MacDonald. Daffy's on skis, Jingle Bells. It's not only just smoothing him out with his original music, but just you got to give credit to Milt Franklin for he was the orchestrator. He was the one that said, over here, this part, I think trumpet should do that. I think to sell this gag, clarinet should play this little excerpt or whatever. And it's just the different tone colors that an orchestra provides in cartoons, and more in music in general, it really sells the joke a lot more. So there's a decent amount of cues, but they work so well in this cartoon. It's more the obvious, like, oh, he's flying in the air, captain of the clouds. Oh, he's a sailor, Song of the Marines. You know, it's more, not subtle, but just more like obvious, but it still works incredibly well.
Some of them I'm like, yeah, it's pretty straightforward. The other one's like, is this an original thing by Starling, or is it something else? But
that's the beauty of Carl Stalling. Some tunes, you can't tell if they're by him or by someone else. I know that Chuck Jones grew to dislike Stallings, constantly using similar songs here and there, but he always knew how to fit the scene, and he would weave them in so well that like I said, you can't tell if you're hearing an original melody or something that already exists. It's brilliant.
So when I offered up this cartoon to my various friends as to who wants to join me, you can imagine that such a milestone short would get a lot of attention. So my good friends Luke Perkins and my good friend John, they both wanted to say a few things about this short. But hey, if any short deserves to have a big video like this, it's definitely this one. So first up, you'll hear from Luke, and then you'll hear from my good friend John. Naturally, you're going to get a few things that will be repeated, but that just can't be helped. I hope you still enjoy anyway. So take it away, Luke, and take it away, John.
All right, let's get this picture started. No!
Well, it's been a while since I came here to talk about Looney Tunes, but here I am. The last one I recorded was for a bit about Farm Frolics, which was like September. And in terms of chronological order, which was mouse warming, I recorded that one in July of last year. But I'm here anyways, and I got to say, I picked the really good classic to return to, and we are talking about Duck Amuck. Before I get to short in hand, I just want to say that knowing when this came out, 1953 was an insane year for cinema. Not just in terms of how great a lot of the movies that came out this year were, like Roman Holiday and Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, which are considered to be some of the greatest of Golden Age cinema. Marilyn Monroe had her true breakout year with 3 classics like Niagara, Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, like I mentioned before, and How to Marry a Millionaire, which got her to superstar status and made her a household name, to which I called the 53 trilogy. And by the way, this will not be the last time I talk about Marilyn Monroe in this channel. There was also CinemaScope that was introduced as a widescreen format that was able to be accessible for theaters. 3D came around and then died and then came back and then died and then came back every few years or so as a reoccurring trend. And it was a really interesting year for cinema. As for animation that year, Walt Disney Animation Studios released Peter Pan, which, putting the elephant in the room aside, it was still an exciting, swashbuckling adventure film with some really iconic moments in Disney history. Then there's UPA, or United Productions of America, which released a rather serious take on Edgar Allan Poe's classic, The Telltale Heart, which was quite striking in terms of what was going on in American animation at the time, which was more comfortable with sticking to comedy and animals. And now we come back to Looney Tunes and Warner Brothers, which released some great classics this year. And a lot of the great cartoon classics came from Chuck Jones, his storyman Michael Maltese, and their great animation unit, including Duck Amuck, which we're going to be talking about right now. This one was a particular favorite around my grandparents' house, rest in peace, as I had a VHS of the Bugs Bunny and Roadrunner movie, as I brought up a while back a few times before, if you remember. Which, that movie is basically a greatest hits medley of Chuck Jones shorts, and this one in particular was on there. So I had a nostalgic spot for this one as well. I know a lot has been said about this classic, from its unusual concept to how it pretty much felt like nothing else at the time, to how it's considered one of the greats. I should start with an angle with one question. What did the audiences of 1953 think when they saw this short. It's cool that this short is played around a lot in current retrospectives of Looney Tunes so that we could see people's reactions in theaters, but I would love to know what was the reaction like back in the day, because I saw some lobby cards of when the short first came out, and those lobby cards have Daffy going against the cartoonist holding a paintbrush. Yet when you watch the short, the surprise isn't revealed, not even at the title cards, until at least after the first 40 seconds, where it seems like a typical cartoon of Daffy Duck playing a musketeer, and then suddenly the background disappears. I always wondered about the reaction to that at the time. To them, when it started, it just seemed like it was just a one-off fourth wall break. Definitely something tech-savvy would have done if we're going to be honest. But then, it keeps going, and going, and going, until it reaches full absurdity. Then there's also that really funny bit with Daffy trying to reason with the cartoonist, and then the screen around him keeps trying to shut him up. If you saw that bit in the theater, you would think the screen was breaking. Same with the bit of Daffy dancing, and then it seems like the 35mm reel, which, if you saw a cartoon back in the day, it would always be in the 35mm reel. Same with a lot of movies. It would seem like the reel would be breaking, showing another Daffy at the bottom, leading to that iconic "down here, what are you doing up there, down here" line. And that sequence of what I was talking about with the dancing and the screen breaking was wonderfully animated by Ben Washam, who I think is one of the great animators to work with Chuck's unit, in my opinion. It just shows how far Chuck and his unit were willing to go to get the audience to laugh, but in more abstract ways than what would be the typical comedy of a Looney Tunes short. Yet, I would love to know what people thought at the time. This one was even shortlisted and even considered to get a Best Animated Short Academy Award, and yet it didn't get nominated. I would also like to bring up how this feels like the true introduction to the work of Maurice Noble, a layout artist. Even if this wasn't his first short to work at Warner Brothers, nor was it his first time working with Chuck Jones. They actually kind of worked together on the Snafu shorts together during World War II. Really because, well, Maurice Noble was leaving Disney due to the strike and was doing a lot of freelance until working with Chuck Jones. But this feels like Maurice Noble finally being able to go wild with a cartoon like this, in a natural way at least. Like the background of the castle seems normal as a beginning at first, but then we get to the farm, the igloo, the island, or even that pencil sketched looking background. Everything gets more stylized as the cartoon goes on. Flowers are implied to be on branches even if they're not sticking logically. Clouds are implied with white sleeping lines without the inside being colored. The steam from a volcano has this smoke coming out with swirly lines that are also not colored in. The skies are also pink sometimes, and it looks great. The backgrounds and layouts of this cartoon are not only great additions to the joke, but also an effective use of staging and spacing, like the closeup bit, for example. Another interesting thing I want to bring up is the formatting of Daffy just wanting to do a cartoon while the cartoonist screws with him. You'll see the paintbrush appear a lot in this cartoon, and I have to wonder if that was inspired by the 1948 package film by Disney, Melody Time. In that film, a paintbrush is used as a framing device to transition from musical set piece to musical set piece, with the brush painting the titles and setting the mood of what each musical sequence provides. Did Chuck or Michael possibly see the film and thought it would be an interesting idea to use the concept in a more abstract way? Or did they not really think of it like that, or it might have just been a coincidence even though they came out a few years separated from one another? We'll never know, honestly, but that's fine in my opinion. But I personally think the short's best attribute is how Chuck Jones and Michael Maltese were able to show not only how versatile Daffy Duck was as a cartoon character when you consider his evolution, but how his personality will shine regardless of appearance or even voice. You make him a musketeer, he's still Daffy Duck. You make him a farmer, he's still Daffy Duck, even playing around with the E-I-E-I-O when he's singing Old MacDonald. You turn him into a silent cowboy, he still acts like Daffy Duck. You make him whatever creature he was turned into in the middle of the short, he's still Daffy Duck. Even with the surprise reveal of Bugs Bunny turning out to be the cartoonist at the end, it still feels like something Bugs Bunny would have done. So yes, this cartoon is a definite 10 out of 10 from me. It is a classic in every step of the way, and another one to add to some of Chuck's best directing work for the Looney Tunes. I also think it's a personal favorite Looney Tunes short of mine, even if I don't really watch it a lot of times, because sometimes I usually put the spotlight on others, and yet I still really like this one very much. Anyway, that is enough from me. I was really glad to be a part of this. I might be able to appear for Much Ado About Nothing. I really hope so, because that's actually one of my personal favorites. But nonetheless, do take care. That's all, folks.
Hello, it's me, John, and today I'm gonna give my thoughts on my favorite Warner Brothers cartoon, Duck Amuck. This cartoon is not only my favorite Warner cartoon, my favorite Daffy Duck cartoon, and my favorite Chuck Jones short, but it's among my favorite pieces of animation ever made, because it's such a great cartoon, so funny, so memorable and quotable, that I just love it. It has a special place in my heart. Ever since I watched it when I was a kid, like 5-6 years old, I loved it the first time I watched it, and when I revisited it years later, I remember the reason why I love the Looney Tunes, and especially why Daffy is one of the best Warner Brothers characters. I'm just gonna highlight some of my favorite parts of the cartoon. Among my favorite parts includes obviously the beginning with Daffy as the musketeer until he sees that the background is empty and asks for the scenery. And then when he's back, it's a different one. And I just love that gag that every time he changes clothes to fit with the scenery just changes. It's pretty funny. Another part is the part where Daffy's trying to speak, but instead he makes some weird animal noises. And the point where he just gets red and begins screaming. I just love that. That's a great scene. And the best part is watching that scene slow motion. You see all the poses Daffy does. That's great. Such great animation. Another part I really love is when Daffy's being attacked by the screen and he breaks all the scene and goes like, alright, let's get this picture started. The end screen appears and it's like, no, no, no. And finally is the ending where Daffy is already tired, like he can't take it anymore and demands to know who's behind all of this. And eventually gets revealed that it's Bugs Bunny. It's such a great cartoon. I loved it. It's a 10 out of 10. It's such an amazing short. I recommend everyone to watch it at least. It's like one of those things that you have to watch before dying. But yeah, and that's all that I have to say about my favorite Warner Brothers cartoon ever made. And I'll see you guys in another review. See ya.
So, let's get into the rating for this short. Come on. Are we going to give this anything less than 10? It is a masterpiece, even if we may have seen it a million times. Of course, I'm going to give it a 10. It's a well-known, well-loved, and greatly influential cartoon for a reason. So, yeah, 10 out of 10. Would you guys agree, or a little bit lower? Manny's probably like, oh, don't bring me into this.
Yeah, I can't think of anything else to give it other than a 10 out of 10. Like, I feel like even if you're not that big of a fan of the film, it remains a masterpiece of a short for a very good reason.
Like, Manny, is it a 10?
I mean, Eli just said pretty much what's on my mind. It's not in my personal top, definitely not my top 10, maybe top 20, top 30, but I can't deny it. It's one of the best shorts the studio ever made, and just another notch on Chuck Jones's absolute insane hot streak of brilliant cartoons from, you could say, the mid-40s until the end of the 50s. Like, he was the most consistent director the studio had at that time period. And yeah, I'm not going to be that guy. I'm going to go with the crowd. I'm going to give in to peer pressure and say that this cartoon is a 10 out of 10. Yes, it's a masterpiece, you know. It's a great cartoon, and it holds up.
Yeah, for sure. But I think that'll do it for this one. And I will point out before we go the irony where before we started recording, we're like, what on earth are we going to talk about? I don't know how long this review's going to be. And it ended up being a very long review with the raw recording being like 50-something minutes. So, but that'll do it for this one. Thank you so much for watching, guys. And until next time, take care.
Adios, Flovista.
Thanks for the sour persimmons, cousin.
Who is responsible for this? I demand that you show yourself! Who are you? Huh?
Am I a stinker?